10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Prehistory of the United States. History of Native Americans in the United States and Pre-Columbian era. It is not definitely known how or when Native Americans first settled the Americas and the present-day United States. The prevailing theory proposes that people from Eurasia came across Beringia and land bridge that connected Siberia to present-day Alaska during the Ice Age, and then spread southward throughout the Americas. This migration may have begun as early as 30,000 years ago, and continued through to about 10,000 years ago, when the land bridge became submerged by the rising sea level caused by the melting glaciers. These early inhabitants, called Paleo-Indians, soon diversified into hundreds of culturally distinct nations and tribes. The Pre-Columbian era incorporates all periods in the history of Americas before the appearance of European influences on the American continents. Spanning from the original settlement in the Upper Paleolithic period of the European colonization during the early modern period, while term technically refers to the era before Christopher Columbus voyaged in 1492. In practice, the term usually includes the history of American indigenous cultures until they were conquered or significantly influenced by Europeans, even if this happened decades or centuries after Columbus' initial landing. Paleo-Indians. By 10,000 BC, humans were relatively well established throughout North America. Originally, Paleo-Indians hunted Ice Age megafauna like mammoths, but as they began to go extinct, people turned instead to bison as a food source. As time went on, foraging for berries and seeds became an important alternative to hunting. Paleo-Indians in central Mexico were the first in the Americas to farm, starting to plant corns, beans, and squash around 8,000 before century. Eventually, the knowledge began to spread northward. By 3000 before century, corn was being grown in the valleys of Arizona and New Mexico, followed by primitive irrigation system and early villages of the Hohokam. One of the earlier centuries in the present-day United States was the Clovis culture, who are primarily identified by the use of fluted spears point called the Clovis point. From 9100 to 8050 before century, the culture ranged over much of North America and also appeared in South America. Artifacts from this culture were first excavated in 1932 near Clovis, New Mexico. The Folsom culture was similar, but is marked by the use of the Folsom point. Later migration identified by linguists, anthropologists, and archaeologists occurred around 8000 before century. This included Na-Dene-speaking people who reached the Pacific Northwest by 5000 before century. From there, they migrated along the Pacific coast and into the interior and constructed large multifamily dwellings in their villages. They were used only seasonally in the summer to hunt and fish, and the winter to gather food supplies. Another group, Osara tradition people, lived from 5500 before century to 900 century, were part of the Arctic Southwest. Mound builders and Pueblos. The Athena began constructed large earthworks mound around 600 before century. They are the earliest known people to have been mound builders. However, there are mounds in the United States that predate this culture. Watson Bridge is an 11-mound complex in Louisiana that dates to 3500 BC and near built by the Poverty Point culture. Is an earthwork complex that dates to 1700 BC. These are mound-like serve a religious purpose. The Athenians were absorbed into the Hopewell tradition, a powerful people who traded tools and goods across wide territory. They continued the Athena tradition of mound building, with remnants of several thousand still in existence across the core of their former territory in southern Ohio. The Hopewell pioneered a trading system called the Hopewell Exchange System, which at its greatest extent ran from the present-day southeast up to the Canadian side of Lake Ontario. By 500 after century, the Hopewellians had to disappear, absorbed into the largest Mississippian culture. The Mississippians were a broad group of tribes. Their most important city was Cahokia, near modern-day St. Louis, Missouri. At its peak in the 12th century, the city had an estimated population of 20,000, larger than the population of London at the time. The entire city was centered around a mound that stood 100 feet, about 30 meters tall. Cahokia, like many other cities and villages of the time, depend on hunting, foraging, trading, and agriculture, and developed a class system with slaves and human sacrifice that was influenced by societies to the south, like the Mayan. In the southwest, the Anasazi began constructed stone and adobe pueblos around 900 BC. These apartment-like structures were often built into cliff faces, as seen in the Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde. Some grew to be the size of cities, with Pueblo Bonito along the Chaco River in the New Mexico one consisting of 800 rooms. Northwest and Northeast. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest were likely the most affluent Native Americans. Many distinct culture and political nations developed there. But they also shared certain belief traditions and practices, such as the centrality of salmon as a resource and spiritual symbol. Permanent villages began to develop in the region as early as 1000 before century, and this community celebrated by the gift-giving feast of the potluck. These gatherings were usually organized to commemorate special events such as the rising of the totem pole or the celebration of New Year. In present day, upstate New York, the Iroquois formed a confederacy of tribal nations in the mid-15th century, consisting of the Oneida, Mohawk, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. Their system of affiliation was a kind of federation, different from the strong, centralized European monarchies. Each tribe had seat in a group of 50 circumchiefs. It has been suggested that culture contributed to political thinking during the development of the United States government. The Iroquois were powerful, waging war with many neighboring tribes and later Europeans. As their territory expanded, smaller tribes were forced further west, including the Osage, Gao, Poncha, and Omaha peoples. Native Hawaiians. Polynesians began to settle in the Hawaiian Islands between the 1st and the 10th centuries, around 1200 century. Tahitian explorers found and began settling the area as well. This marked the rise of the Hawaiian civilization, which would be largely separated from the rest of the world until the arrival of the British 600 years later. Europeans under the British explorer James Cook arrived in the Hawaiian Islands in 1778, and within the 5 years of contact, European military technology would help Kamehameha. I conquer most of the people and eventually unify the islands of the first time, establishing the Hawaiian Kingdom. Norse exploration. The earliest recorded European mention of America is in a historical treatise by the medieval chronicler Adam of Bremen, circa 1075. Norse Finland sagas, which relate to events which occurred around 1000. While it's the strongest archaeological evidence of the existence of Norse settlements in America is located in Canada, most notably at Alonzo Oaks Meadows, and date to circa 1000. There is significant scholarly debate as to whether Norse explorers also made landfall in New England and other East Coast areas in 1925. President Calvin Coolidge declared that a Norse explorer called Leif Erikson, 970 to 1020 century, was the first European to discover America. Thank you for watching this video. Wait for next coming new video from this channel. Thank you very much.